We've made it across Bangladesh. As you may know, India surrounds Bangladesh on both the east and the west sides. But we came in from the west part of Bangladesh and made it across to the east part. We were a little worried about coming because there's a political campaign going on, and there's an enormous amount of political strife. In fact, every few days, one of the political parties will call a strike, which means anybody who is seen on the streets is liable to get killed, because the instructions to their political members are kill them, beat them up, whatever, because it's somebody from the other party defying the strike. So needless to say, that was a little bit anxiety-provoking, because we had to be on the streets to get into the capital, Dhaka, and then to get on across the country. But we made it. Coming into Bangladesh, you almost immediately see that it is perhaps the most densely populated country in the world. The statistics say it, but until you've been here, you probably don't really understand what that means. It's more densely crowded than even China, and some parts of China are unbelievably densely populated. You notice immediately that it's a Muslim country. When we left India, which is largely a Hindu country, we came here and immediately were back into a Muslim country. As you may remember, when India was given its independence in 1947, they split off East and West Pakistan in those days for the Muslims. Well, the place called East Pakistan eventually broke away from West Pakistan in 1971 and became Bangladesh. We also find here tombs for holy men. Over the centuries, imams or ministers, we would call them in the West, frequently reach the status of an imam, I-M-A-N, or supreme holy man, and they literally become almost like our saints. There's sects around them. They're worshippers of these holy men. You see immediately that the Muslim influence, it is a Muslim country. You also see that it's a Bengali country. You can see in the written language, Bengal is a part of eastern India and western Bangladesh, and they are the same ethnic group or the same linguistic group. And another thing you see very, very quickly is that the leftovers from the English colonial past, some of the buildings are just remarkable colonial architecture. It is pretty staggering, some of these old buildings. Another thing you notice pretty quickly, in addition to how crowded it is, how the housing is very crowded. Some people would call it slums, although some of the people living in the housing, in the flats and the apartment buildings, think that they are the height of luxury compared to where they came from in the countryside. The traffic in Dhaka, the capital, is extraordinary. It's like some of the other places we've been, crowded cities, Bombay, Delhi, Cairo, Istanbul. It's really pretty amazing. In Bangladesh, you see a huge numbers of three-wheel scooters, which are used to transport people around. Obviously, they're cheaper than taxis, but they also cause an enormous amount of pollution. Dhaka is not only the most densely populated, capital of the most densely populated country in the world, it is the most polluted city in the world. And I promise you, the studies show it, but we can verify it. There's a fair amount of English spoken in Bangladesh. It was a former English colony, so it's not as extensive as it is in perhaps India or Pakistan, but there is a certain amount of English, and we did run into people who love to practice their English. And as you can imagine, in the subcontinent, we ran into forts, especially this huge Lal Bagh fort. Don't quote my Bengali. It's left over from the English colonial past, but it was really built by the Mughals when they were here. The Mughals came through this part of the world several hundred years ago and dominated the subcontinent. You find them in India, you also find them in Pakistan. And one of the other things that one has to comment on, one talks about Bangladesh, is how wet the country is. There are rivers and lakes and ponds everywhere. It is one of the wettest countries in the world. That's one reason they have such a huge rice crop here, and I promise you, it is a humid, humid place. We have been on TV often as we went around the world. It happened again here. I mean, there are not many people driving around the world these days, and most of them, or very, very few of them, if any, make it through Bangladesh. So it probably helped us a little bit. And one of the other things that we found in Bangladesh, and we find this in many developing countries, many people are illiterate, and so on the streets you will find public typists. In other words, if you need a letter written to somebody, you go to the typist, you dictate the letter, he types it, and they send it off for you. Or if you have to have a form filled out for the government, you go to the public typist, and they will type it for you. They're all very cheap. This is something that obviously has disappeared from developed countries, but in many developing countries it still exists, and it's a great public service, especially in countries where there's a lot of illiteracy. All in all, we had a lot of fun in Bangladesh. It's unique, but I guess that's a simple statement. Every country is unique. I hope we get to come back despite all its problems. We did make it through alive, and it's an enormous interest, and not many people come here. So if you want to get to a place that's untouched by outsiders and by tourists, head to Bangladesh, but be prepared for the pollution and the unbelievably crowded conditions.